Okay, and welcome to episode 31 of Shockwaves. I'm one of your hosts, Rob G. I'm sitting here with Mr. Elric Kane.
It's an exciting day here.
It is exciting, and you get back to top billing. Yeah, you've been behaved for a while. Rebekah McKendry's with us.
First time you haven't said doctor in a couple of weeks.
I know. Well, we've done that.
We've done that.
Weeks.
Okay, I'll let it go, guys.
The doctor thing's getting a little much.
I'm going to be honest. I want to see the certificate. I mean, it's hearsay that you got a doctorate.
It should arrive end of December.
All right. Well, we're going to
carry that thing around.
Yes.
And, of course, last but not least, Mr. Ryan Turek.
Hello.
Official fourth co-host of the show.
Official?
We can move it. Much like the Dr. McKendry.
I think we can move on. Let's move past Ryan's inclusion in the doctor thing.
I don't know. People keep giving us shit, so I got to...
I think they're my two favorite things.
Elric, I bestow you with a great guest today.
You really did.
Yeah.
How many episodes of Killer PV? 130?
We did 140 Killer PV episodes, and then now we're on this show. And this is one of the people that we've wanted the whole time.
The only time we were ever jealous of Ryan.
And I kept begging. I was begging for a Star Trek guest, and then finally you guys gave me Jeffrey Combs, but you wouldn't let me ask any Star Trek questions.
Of course not. Why would we do that? But welcome to the show, Mr. Bryan Fuller.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes.
And I think, you know what it was I know you were on Ryan's show, The Bloodcast.
Yes.
So I heard you on that. I heard you on a couple of podcasts, but the reason I wanted you on this show so badly was because on one of them, they asked you about your earliest recollections of horror, and you spoke about Friday the 13th Part 2 with such reverence and love.
That's right.
I love that movie.
That I'm like, all right, this guy loves Friday too. We need to talk horror. Like, seriously, like, he holds it up as a piece of art, which it is.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, and they were very thoughtful with that remake. I love Amy Steele's character, and I love that she was a child psychologist. They weren't just phoning it in. They were like, okay, what's the next level of this story that we can be telling?
Yeah. You see, and this is why you're here.
That's why you're here. So we could have a fifth co-host. I'm open to a fifth co-host.
So, Brian, if you want to jump on anytime, you're welcome. But let's start at the beginning. I mean, for us, we always love to hear about earliest recollections of the horror genre, because when you're young and impressionable, you never forget, like, the first time you see the Universal Monster movies or whatever. What was it for you? What was your introduction to this world?
I think that my introduction to horror was actually the MUNSTERS, and through the MUNSTERS, I discovered Universal Monsters, and even to this day, what was so fascinating about the Universal Monsters is that they were essentially the heroes of the story, and their story was a very human one, and they weren't traditional villains. They were always being the misunderstood other was always the central theme of Universal horror, and I found that to be compelling and relatable. And I think once my testicles dropped, I got into Stock and Slash, and so.
And what was your first?
Oh God! Probably the first one that I remember was Black Christmas, and 'tis the season.
It is,
so it's a good one to talk about.
I'm really curious. Was there a non-horror movie related? Was there a film that you were introduced to that had an element of horror that, like, just scared the complete shit out of you?
I would say Escape to Witch Mountain.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah, that movie used to scare me.
Well, there was something going on that was very exciting, and it was in this world, but there were elements that were outside of it. Probably even earlier than that. The Pinocchio donkey transformation scene I found.
The whole island was like really messed up.
Effed up, yeah. That was.
Thanks, and you know what's unifying? Because for me, it was Dragon Slayer.
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember
Dragon
Slayer.
Yeah,
in which they sacrificed a poor princess, and then the hero went into the cave to go find the girl, and there were dragon babies gnawing on her fucking
leg.
ankle, and like they found like a severed foot, and I was like, oh my God, something that can happen to the human body? What? So thank you, Disney, because that was a Disney film for you, and for you, Becca, that was Disney. So thank you, Disney.
I did a list of them on the site a couple of months ago, but Disney did this thing like in the late 70s, early 80s, where they released all of these like really messed up films, and they were still under the Disney Disney logo with Mickey and that damn wizard cap on the front cover, but then you turn it on and you're watching like Black Cauldron.
Black Hole.
Yeah, Black Hole. Thank you. Black Hole.
Hole.
Watcher in the Woods. There was just a whole bunch of these that they did. There was one with Anthony Perkins in it. Oh, wait, that was Black Hole. Thank you.
Yeah.
That I just remember watching when I was a kid, and they messed me up so bad, but I loved them.
A little off compared to what you would normally watch as a kid. But
did you enjoy being scared straight away, or were you someone who had to work his way up to that feeling? Because a lot of us were actually just terrified of these films initially.
I liked seeing reality in the rearview mirror, and I think that was thrilling. So whenever something wasn't contained within the parameters of reality, I got really excited about it, whether it was The Wolfman or Creature from the Black Lagoon or, creepy twins that hid pitchforks in haystacks and things like that were not necessarily traditional scary movies as much as they were intriguing character pieces.
Yeah, more like fairy tales in a way.
Yeah, which I found incredibly appealing.
Yeah. Do you remember, because I assume you're growing up in the 80s too, once you got into the 80s films, because that changes. I think those films are also, we always talk about how fantastical they are compared to horror in the 90s and post. Was there any particular film in that period, because, when you're still young, that had a big impact?
There were many. I loved Fright Night. I loved the original Fright Night. There was something fascinating about it. I loved that it had this kind of queer, subversive quality to it with Jerry Dandridge and his manservant, and also Evil Ed's seduction. And I remember watching it with my older brother, and my older brother had like homosexual panic at Evil Ed in the alleyway taking Jerry Dandridge's hand, and he was like, "That kid's not right." And I was like, "Oh, he's got gaydar." And it's freaking him out.
Early gaydar.
Yeah. So, I'm a big fan of, as far as iconic 80s horror, Fright Night is a favorite.
Yeah. Nice. So for you, the household that you grew up in, were you nurtured? Was that horror love nurtured? And was that talent that you were kind of like... Were you writing really early on in life, or
I was reading voraciously? Yeah. I think that was my favorite childhood memories were getting on a bicycle and pedaling down to Albertsons and buying a bag of green grapes and hiding in the darkness and reading. And it was such a fun escape, and I think that's why I have good skin as an adult, is I never saw the sun. I was always inside reading.
And what were some of the authors that really got you at that point that you fell in love with?
Well, I was really big into novelizations of movies, movie tie-ins that cool. I couldn't go see because they were rated R and I wasn't old enough. So I loved the movie tie-ins to Halloween and Friday the 13th and The Fog and...
so you read these before you saw the film?
I read all...
that is a fascinating perspective.
I read all of these books before I saw the film.
Were any of them better then? Like you read it and then saw the movie and was like, Halloween, it's okay.
Like I've heard the Nomads book is actually better than the movie, but I haven't read it.
Deep cut. It wouldn't be hard to be better than that movie.
The Pierce Brosnan?
Yeah, the Pierce
Brosnan film.
Hey, he knew that. Fifth co-host right there.
Yeah, I remember... I know I saw it on VHS, and I feel like I have sense memories or images of him in a parka, and that's about it.
Yeah. It's about like getter pugs.
Forgettable.
But they're a tribe and supernatural.
You're not missing much.
It's okay.
Did he ever wear a parka in that movie?
I feel like he did. It may have been a duster.
Rebekah knows at minute 5. 36 seconds in.
Because I'm unable to watch
parka
him.
Action.
I can't watch a movie and then read a book. Even if it's The Shining, I don't have any desire to read a book after I've already experienced the film. But the idea of reversing that is fascinating to me.
The world... Well, so what did you think of Shining movie versus Shining book?
No, I never got to the book because I'd only seen the movie. That's what I mean. Like, I can't go the other way. I have to read the book first and then see a movie. But I can't. If I've seen it, it's those images are burned too deep.
And then those actors take the place.
You can't just play it in your mind anymore. The theater of your mind is closed. and you just have the movie memory.
Well, there's something I watched the Harry Potter movies and then I read the book, and I found it an interesting experience because the world got bigger, and I knew the context, and I knew the stories well enough, but I for all of the Harry Potters, I waited until I saw the movie until I read the book, but that does not include page sort of sneak peek
Fan fiction.
Like who should I root for in the Battle of Hogwarts, and who should I not? Who should I just let go of now?
Wow, the novelization thing is fascinating. We actually know a guy named Jim Coons who's making a documentary about novelizations right now.
Of horror movies specifically?
Well, I think it's just all, because there's so many.
But a lot of them will be.
It's a mixed bag of genre stuff,
Wow.
Well, sometimes you get whole other stories, like the Funhouse novelization is so completely different. Not completely different from the movie, but it has an entire storyline for the mother and her history with the freak show, and how this is a whole revenge story, actually, and it's not just a stock and slash. They were like, well, let's give this character that you only see for like 3 minutes in the beginning.
Well, what I love is every time I hear anything about these books is that largely they are being written while the film's in production, so they've never even seen, the novelists haven't seen these movies, and that's the part that I think is fascinating. So they're imagining a film side by side of an actual film.
Yeah, well, the most revealing was, Scream Factory just put out The Thing on Blu-ray, and there's a bonus feature with, I think it's Alan Dean Foster, who's one of these guys that has done a ton of novelizations. And it was just so eye-opening because The Thing is based on a short story, and he explains he usually just gets the first draft of the shooting script.
Right.
So whatever changes, they will never know. They're just basing it on that. But I found it fascinating that here's a guy who's writing a novel based on a movie that's based on a short. And kind of explaining like how he goes about it and how that final product could end up being totally different. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating.
It's so much easier to write a screenplay than it is a novel, because a novel you have to fill in all of the point of view. Yeah. And I remember reading Halloween. It was testicle dropping time. So you were in Michael Myers' point of view, looking at the women through the windows, and he would reference the throbbing in his pants, and I was like, what's going on? Oh my God. So it was some of those novelizations with the TNA quotient in a horror movie, which is the have sex and die, you get a different perspective on sex and sexuality, more because personal. You're actually oh, I really like her type of thing.
Did it describe any more of his background?
Yeah. It was fascinating because it heavily suggested a connection. The reason I like Halloween 3 so much is getting into the Sam Hain mythology. And that ran through the first Halloween novel, like Marble. It was a lot of Sam Hain influences and how Michael Myers was. There was something supernatural going on with him, rooted in this ancient Celtic mythology.
Wow.
That gave it a resonance. So when I saw Halloween 3, I was like, we're still using the same vocabulary. I don't mind that it doesn't have Michael Myers.
Well, next level. That's not been in any of the movie adaptations.
No, my vague memory, I have the novelization, I haven't read in years, but my vague memory is the whole first half was him in the institution, like all this backstory stuff. So when you see the movie, it cuts kind of to the middle of the novelization. Right. But I thought that was fascinating that they actually filled in all those blanks.
Yeah. Did you kind of take that love for genre and steer it into stuff like Shirley Jackson, Louise Duncan?
Oh
like that. Christopher Pike.
Even Flannery O'Connor. There's a lot. There's horror to be found everywhere in great writing if you know how to look for it. So. I love the pop horror of, stock and slashes and, traditional horror movie. But I also love the literary horror like The Haunting, which Haunting is such an amazing film because it's all sound design. And I thought Drag Me to Hell took such a big cue from The Haunting in terms of how to scare the shit out of everybody. With amazing sound design and still be PG-13. Or was it? Yeah, it was PG-13, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were writing kind of early on, but since we're talking about novelizations, was film kind of the trajectory you wanted to take professionally? Because it sounds like you, and I don't know if you tried to be, but you very easily could have been a novelist as a writer. So what made you decide that you kind of wanted to go somewhere towards film?
I was studying to be a psychiatrist. I was fascinated with psychology. It may have had something I think I got bit by it by Still of the Night, that Roy Scheider, Meryl Streep movie where he was a psychiatrist and there was a mystery with his patient. And I was like, what is this thing that they do where they're looking into people's minds?
I had that with body bags. I saw body bags. And I studied criminology at university because of body bags.
Right.
I wouldn't admit it to people.
Criminology?
I've got a degree in criminology because I was like, I want to be a criminal psychologist like Jeff Fahey. You can't explain it. You just see it and you think it's a good idea.
160 episodes, and that's the biggest bomb we've ever got.
Hey, you know?
You guys, I have a lot of background in entomology too, but that got revealed way
You like
early.
ticks. What are you gonna do?
I like ticks, so I did. So.
Well, it's because you're falling in love with the movie idea of a job, not the actual reality of a job.
Right.
I have to quiz you on criminal psychology now, Elric.
Star Trek 4, I was in middle school when that came out, and I was like, I want to be an oceanographer. I'm going
Yeah.
to save the whales.
Yeah.
And, then I was
And
like,
the Earth.
and the
as
Earth,
well.
exactly. Yeah.
That's fun.
So what was kind of how difficult was it to kind of get a break professionally? Because I only know this vaguely because, again, I listen to several podcasts, but I know the amazing story of you writing Star Trek Spec,
Right.
and getting involved. So bring us up to that point. Was it a difficult, once you decided you wanted to be a screenwriter?
Well, yeah.
How hard was it to get there?
I went to film school to be a director, and somehow intrinsically understood that being a writer was going to be a lot more work than I wanted to commit, because it's like you have homework every night. It's relentless. So somehow I realized that, and I was like, I don't want to be a writer. And so I was working on being a director. I knew I wanted to be a storyteller. And I was a big Star Trek fan, and I was watching an episode of Deep Space Nine, and I just saw the code of the storytelling. I was like, oh, this is the rise and fall and rhythm of the story that they're telling. I understand it now. I can put that down to paper. And so at that time, they had an open script submission policy for folks who, because they were making hundreds of episodes per show and wanted to make sure they had a constant influx of ideas. So they were looking outside for submissions. I wrote a spec, submitted it. It got declined. It didn't go anywhere. Then I wrote another one, and that got me into pitch. And then I pitched the story of the first script that they that didn't qualify me to come in, and sold that.
Wow.
Perseverance.
Which episode did that become?
That became a story called Darkness and the Light, where Kira Nerese's the members of her former terrorist cell were all being eliminated one by one, and oh my gosh, it's doing
Slasher.
Yeah.
exactly.
Slasher
It
comes
was a
back.
slasher. It was a slasher
space.
film, yeah.
Now, would that ever happen again? I mean, was that like a right place, right time situation in terms of how, because you love the show so much, and then you get to be a part of it?
Yeah, I think that because of there were so many lawsuits around that open script submission policy, that we're a much more litigiously aware society, and it makes me sad that it is very unlikely, because if somebody wrote a Borg story and that you were doing a Borg story, they were thinking, oh my gosh, they stole my Borg idea. Even though, and I can tell you, being in a writer's room, people get the same ideas. People have the same influence exposed, and they have human brains that make connections in certain ways. So ideas do tend to repeat themselves. And particularly in a show like Star Trek, where there's such an existing mythology and everybody's inspired by certain aspects of it, you want to tell stories with the Borg because they're so cool. So I don't think open script submission for television is going to happen again in the way it happened there. And it was a very special time, and it was pioneered by one of the executive producers, who was an amazing man and wanted to foster writing in others and was like a big fan of writing, and he was Michael Piller, and he just was one of those. If you're a writer, if you have that spark of I want to tell a story, he wanted to foster it and get in there. So it was really his idea and his championing of writers who may not have otherwise found an audience for their voice.
Who was, coming up, who was your champion? Who was the person that kind of took you under their wing? Was there anybody specific that kind of helped guide you?
I would say there were a few. I would say Brannon Braga, Ronald D. Moore, and Joe Menosky and Ira Bear were all writers at Star Trek from completely different perspectives of storytelling that I learned a lot from each individually from a completely different direction.
And was there anything that you learned from them that like kind of disrupted your view of the writing process or your creative process that you were just like, aha, why wasn't I seeing it from this point of view?
I think the repetition of doing it where you're like, oh, it's really not about the thing, it's about the person and the person in that story's point of view. And it really isn't about the cool science fiction hook if the cool science fiction hook doesn't give you emotional tingles somewhere with relating to somebody's experience. And I think that was just finding the humanization of storytelling, and because I loved all the technobabble. I thought the technobabble was so much fun because I was like, I get it when they say reroute power to the tertiary inducers of the, I understand what that means, and but a lot of people don't care about it.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to delve into some of the other things that you like in the horror genre as well, but I think this ties into it in terms of how difficult is it as a writer, adapting a piece of material that already exists, because obviously you got to do the CARRIE TV movie, and Hannibal is another big example.
MUNSTERS.
And which one? Oh, and the MUNSTERS. That's right. I almost forgot about that.
And now American Gods.
And now American Gods. So I mean, is it? How do you approach that, where it's not an original idea, but it's something? Even before the Star Trek script, did you think about what you would do if you were in charge of some of these characters you grew up loving?
Yes, and it's interesting because as a writer, I think, also as people who love this type of entertainment, we either imagine ourselves as somebody in the story or we create a character for ourselves to exist alongside the characters in the story to try to find a point of view in and to try to relate to the story personally. And that feels like it's an early empathy skill establishing instinct for storytellers, because you're like, how does the story relate to me? What is my point of view into the story? What is my entry point? So what was the question?
It's about the adaptation process.
Right.
IP.
So getting into with Star Trek, it was it's coming in with Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and that was a different dynamic than say adapting Hannibal, which I think was for me personally, one of the most creatively satisfying adaptation experiences, because I felt like I love these characters, I love their point of view, and there were things in the book that I felt were passages that were giving indicators of character that hadn't made it to the screen yet, whether it was the idea of Will Graham being somebody who is socially challenged and on the spectrum and having a really hard time relating to human beings. And that felt like, oh, that's such a fascinating character that he's so empathetic that he can relate to the worst in mankind, and that's easier for him to do than relating to the best of mankind. And here comes Hannibal Lecter, and what's going to happen now?
Did you take more from the novels or the film adaptations that are existed when you were looking for your vision of it?
Novels, all the way
straight from the books. Yeah.
And it was also tonally, like tone is such a tricky thing in an adaptation because it's it's quicksand, and the tone. Like, I love Silence of the Lambs. I think it's a fantastic movie. I love Hannibal. I think that it's a fantastic movie.
I love Hannibal. The movie. I think it's fantastic.
It's so purple and over the top, and I love those books. I love Red Dragon. I love Silence of the Lambs. I love Hannibal. And I really just wanted to give the audience the cinematic feeling that I got intellectually reading the pages, which were also beautifully written and very purple in their prose. So I thought, like, this show has to be purple. It has to be bloated and beautiful and pretentious, because they are pretentious books and wonderfully pretentious books. And I love pretension because it's somebody saying, I'm just going to go do my thing, and I'm going to wear this crazy dress, and I'm going to go to the grocery store, and I don't care what you think.
Now, did you fall into the world through the books first, through the Thomas Harris ones, or
no, through Manhunter? Manhunter, saw Manhunter in '86. Is that when it came out? Yeah. And then was like, oh, this is based on a book. I want to read this book. And the book was such a bigger world than the movie.
Yeah, because you got Michael Mann's view of it. Michael Mann, a very strong filmmaker who just kind of, he had his own view, but much like you put your own view on it. You know? And what you're watching, I think Manhunter is not, it's a Thomas Harris story, but it's a Michael Mann movie.
Absolutely.
I love when, because the main thing that kept going through my head watching Hannibal, the show, was how it kind of felt like it was all leading up to I kept thinking that, oh, this is all the stuff that happens before he's sitting on that tree in Manhunter at the start. That's all the image that was
in
constantly
those shorts.
Yeah, in that shorts where it's like, so everything leading up to that, I'm like, oh, what's going to happen here? And because Manhunter is an amazing, it's a film you just kind of feel that film.
Right.
It's not about information. It's not a story-driven film. It's
it's an
light and color and
image-driven,
image. Yeah. You always hear the DP breaking it down, how every color meant something to them.
Yeah.
It's so specific. Dante Spinotti, I think it is. Yeah,
we were hearing
DP.
one of the crew members on Hannibal, the TV show, worked on Manhunter and was telling stories, crazy cocaine-fueled stories.
So good.
On that set, where when Tom
Noonan's very candid.
jumps through the moon with the shotgun.
Oh, yeah.
That's a real shotgun firing real bullets.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember hearing that was all shot like in one night. That whole sequence, they were like running out of time.
They didn't know they were going to survive.
Yeah, they're running and oh wow, that's great. That's such it's a wild film.
Well, can I ask about, in terms of Hannibal, what was, because it's a really great fertile time for television in general, because we're getting, remakes or reinterpretations of all these great films. Like The Exorcist right now is the one that we're talking about.
I need to watch it. I hear it's fantastic.
It's great.
It's so good.
You're gonna love it.
I love
It's
Gina
great.
Davis.
But the thing with Hannibal is, when it first started, the first couple episodes in season 1, the assumption is, oh, this is all before Silence of the Lambs. Right. But the fun thing that you guys got to do is really mix and match things that happen in Hannibal later on, and then Hannibal Rising. There's some teases, that stuff, kind of working in different order. But I think it's known that legally Silence of the Lambs was like off limits.
Right, yeah.
So did that kind of benefit how you put the show together, knowing that limitation, knowing, okay, we have the rights to these books, these characters, but not Silence of the Lambs. How are you going to tell this? And how early on did you decide that you were not going to chronologically follow the books or movies?
Well, I think as we would have loved to have had Silence of the Lambs, and still hope that something can be worked out, that we get to continue telling Hannibal Lecter's story and see Silence of the Lambs in a way that the book hasn't been represented. And I think the film adaptation is a perfect film, but there's a lot of interesting nooks and crannies in that book to explore in a television series. And once again, I'm like, what was your question?
Well, it's basically the writing process, in terms of knowing that you can't use that book.
Oh, right.
You can use it. How early on did you guys decide, when you were putting it together, like, oh, well, let's just do this first, kind of stuff from Hannibal a little earlier than it would appear chronologically?
Well, we knew that when I sat down, what I pitched was, this is an area of Hannibal Lecter's life that we haven't seen explored really in the books or the movies, which was when he was a practicing psychiatrist, and about his relationship with Will Graham and
food. That's something I didn't actually think about when I watched the movies. He talks about cannibalism. They imply all the stuff, and you get it. But watching the show, it became a whole different thing. You got this idea of what it is to be this culinary cannibal.
Right.
Yeah.
Fetishistic about food and the way it looks and feels and textures.
Yeah.
It's a totally different vision.
In the movies, it's almost played as if it's like kind of just showing how refined he is. Like, it's not that he has a refined palate. He's just used to a higher cuisine than most folks. So the brain's going to be basted with garlic or whatnot. But yeah, in the show, it definitely became like a whole nother level to it.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things that I was really excited about. And the first call I made after they called me and said, we want you to do it, was to my agent and saying, how do I get a hold of Jose Andres? Because he's such a fantastic chef and he has such an interesting, colorful perspective on food and how to prepare it, and historically that he should be kind of the imprint for Hannibal in the kitchen. And it was really weird and fortuitous, because it was like, well, we represent him, and he just got the James Beard Award, and there's a thing on Tuesday night. Why don't you just go? And I was like, great. And went, and talking to him about food and his passion for food was inspiring for who Hannibal should be, because he should be as fetishistic with what he cooks, and everything has to be perfect. And it was also coming out of the first meeting that I had with Mads Mikkelsen to play Hannibal. He was like, well, he's the devil, right? And I was like, after that, I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could walk that line where he is literally the devil and he is also Hannibal Lecter, human beings. So we did a lot of really subtle things, like Hannibal never has footsteps, like on the soundtrack. Like if you see him walk across the room, he doesn't make a noise because he's the devil and he's made of smoke. And there's lots of speculation by other characters saying the man is smoke, like he is the devil. And we wanted both of those things to always be true with whatever story that we were telling, that you could say, like, this is the version where he's the devil and this is the version where he's just a man. But all of the events around those two versions had to support both versions of the story. Right. If that makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
One thing about movies versus TV, that I don't, I'll hear Bret Easton Ellis or a podcast like, oh, movies are dead, blah, blah, blah. I don't prescribe to that. And I think the difference is that I'm not always story driven. So most of TV is just a story that keeps you hooked on. And it's not the aesthetic approach. And Hannibal was the first show. I think Penny Dreadful went there, but I think Hannibal was the first show, the most successful show I've ever seen to eliminate those boundaries. I felt like every episode was a full-length feature film in aesthetic. And the thing you're going to like this part, I'm going to compare you to Stanley Kubrick, so get ready.
Buckle up.
The thing about Kubrick films are the level of detail and everything is just astounding. Yeah. And this for a guy who didn't storyboard. Everyone thinks he's storyboarded to the hilt, but he didn't, right? The level of detail is incredible, and I met Joe Turkel, the bartender in Shining once, and the one thing he told me was one of my favorite stories. He just talked about how Kubrick had heard an actor from Paths of Glory, an extra had come in, he had one scene, and he was meant to say one line, and he got him to do it 120 times, and then he got the take he wanted and moved on, and Turkel went up to him and goes, what the hell were you doing, man? We're all sitting here, you're doing this 120 times, what are you looking for? He's like, you know what, when a guy came in, before he started doing the takes, he said this one line, he hit this high octave, and I love that high octave. I don't want to tell him how to do it, so I just want to see if he had hit that octave again. And so Turkel said, the thing about Kubrick, he wasn't necessarily the best director, but he's the finest, and he kept saying, he's like a fine suit. The details were everything. And when I watch your show, and we've heard from some people who worked on it, we'd heard some stories about the level of details and everything, but you don't need to hear those stories. You watch that screen in a dinner scene that could be a throwaway scene in another film or another show, right? Like just throw some stuff on the thing. It looks like somebody has walked the floor and made sure everything was fetishistically in place, which it echoes who the character was, and it's cinematic. So I know it's a kind of weird question, but I'm just curious about your attention to details and level of participation in that as the showrunner versus, not actually directing the episode? How much control and say you had in that detail?
Well, it's very important to me. I think that we are living in the era of the screen grab, so anybody can take any image, and the first thing I say to directors is, you're not making television, you're making a pretentious art film. Every frame needs to be able to support a frame around it as a work of art, and we need to utilize the language of cinema because we are in a cinematic medium, and it is not just over, master out. So aesthetics are incredibly important to me. I think, each of the shows that I've done, I've tried to hone a slightly different version of some sort of elegant graphic storytelling frame. And I think it's just part of the job, and it's also one of the reasons I love Stanley Kubrick. And we have the shining bathroom at the FBI, and the first episode of Hannibal was that he has a simplicity and a symmetry of what he does with the frame, yet at the same time fills it with such chaos and complexity that you're always in the hands of an elegant storyteller. And I love elegance in storytelling. I love sort of studio production. I hope we're ending the phase of handheld storytelling because it makes me bonkers.
Unmotivated camera, constantly.
I love it when it's to accentuate a point. But on Hannibal, I would say if you use the handheld camera, I will stabilize it. We will lock on.
That's show running, and I like it.
And we found on some shows that when directors have done that and used a handheld camera, and then we stabilized it later, it does a really interesting, upsetting, disorienting thing with the frame because, and we have this shot in American Gods when we introduce Crispin Glover as Mr. World. It's a handheld shot and he's walking into the room, but we lock onto him so he's still. So the room around him is doing this sort of wacky shack thing that is a happy accident from saying, God damn it, they used a handheld camera and I'm going to stabilize that.
Speaking of masters, just while I'm on it, because Hitchcock. So before you got on, I worked in the floor below you when you were doing season 2. And, first couple episodes of season 1, when I first saw it, I think it's like any show that's been a remake so far. The first episode, I don't know what I'm in a world, and I'm like, oh my god, whoa, that's Hannibal. And I've always loved. I remember Mads and Pusher series. And it took me a while. It took me maybe 3 or 4 episodes, and then
because Anthony Hopkins is so embedded in our mind that it took a few to be.
But it's a new character. That's the thing with Mads. Mads is one of the most interesting. I think that is one of the most interesting performances ever. And the Hunt, he's great too. Hunt's amazing.
And after the wedding, he's heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah. But I remember asking you a couple times in an elevator, just trying to pick questions. But what I snuck upstairs once.
He's the weird guy in the elevator that stopped you around the office.
You had a great little dog and a great scarf. That's my memory.
What type of dog?
Elric took out his microphone and he's like, so let's
talk about this. No, but I snuck up to your floor, which was right above us, and went the writing room, I guess. And man, it's hard to make me jealous because I've been collecting film posters my whole life, but. This whole entire office, not just like one room, but the entire thing, were decorated in the best original Hitchcock posters from all his movies, not just a couple. Like every film poster, and they were all original. I looked up through the thing, and went, oh my god! I almost wanted to knock, just like, can I just touch it? It was special.
Come in and take a look.
And these are your posters, your collection?
I've been collecting movie posters since I was 6 or 7. No, 8. I was 8 because the first movie poster I got was Coma.
Wow,
that was like
Michael
Crichton.
I love that movie. I love Jean-Louis Bujold in that movie.
Oh, she's great.
But I love film art. Film art is fantastic, and it is I think so much of the stuff that we have fetishized from our childhoods are because of really effective marketing, and that goes for film art, that goes for toys. Like it's about the packaging, it's about the marketing, And you look at Star Wars figures now, and who was it? Gentle Giant puts out super scaled Star Wars figures of the little Kenner ones, and you realize it's so Andy Warhol, soup can, pop culture
of its time.
And it's fantastic to think about, because when I was a kid in the 80s, the 50s were like everybody's nostalgia time, and it just seemed like, did they have dinosaurs in the 50s? And now it's the 80s, and it's like the sentimental cycling of marketing archetypes. It's fascinating how we are played by pop culture to like, and I surrender. I'm happy to be played by pop culture.
You are.
And I'm going to say, I just wanted to, I have to follow up because I'm not letting the Hitchcock question go. But I swear I didn't think about it till this exact second, but I just realized that the structure of Hannibal is Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, very much. Or Rope. And Rope is.
But the way one in Strangers on a Train is reeling in the other one.
Yes.
To get closer and closer and closer, and he kind of is the devil in his way. Too.
And it's also a little bit of Uncle Charlie,
Uncle Charlie,
Shadow of a Doubt, and there's so much Hitchcock.
Elegance is. I mean, there's no one more elegant.
Hitchcock and Kubrick were big influences, and I love what David Lynch has done with that sort of strange elegance and made it his own. And then Cronenberg took body horror into an elegant place. We have a lot of really elegant filmmakers in the horror genre that I think give us street cred when we talk about it as a valid form of art.
Interesting.
Rolling it back really quick, because I think when I interviewed you on the last podcast, we never really went in depth on Carrie. And that is what I'm really fascinated by, because at the time, I mean, it was like 2002, I think. So we were kind of in the height of the J-horror craze. So, and then out of nowhere, well, looking at the perspective of what was happening on TV, we had moved out of the 90s into the 2000s, and it wasn't the days of It and Tommyknockers and Storm of the Century, I think, was the last big Stephen King adaptation. So where did Carrie come from? When did it land on your radar that they were going to do something in television? How did you kind of get rolled into that?
I had just sold the pilot for Dead Like Me to MGM, and they were like, hey, we're going to do Carrie. You want to do it? And I was like, yes. And, it's interesting. It was interesting making the show, and it was interesting the dynamics of making that show at that time versus now. And we just had the 40th anniversary of Carrie.
Yep.
Recently, and did you go to the Ace screening? You didn't, because you had your Halloween party.
Yeah, we had,
it was fantastic. They, in the prom scene when Carrie shuts all the lights off and it goes red, they did that in the theater.
Yeah,
saw the video. I was like, ugh.
Yeah, it was super cool.
Yeah.
And the 4K transfer is so crystal clear. You can see the scratch marks on Piper Laurie's face when she's beating herself trying to convince Carrie not to go to the prom. Yeah. And it wasn't makeup. It was just so.
Clawing herself.
There was so much abuse. Everybody was slapping everybody in that film.
Back in the days when you could just slap someone around.
But so doing the remake was interesting because it was post Columbine,
right?
And it felt like, okay, that was a valid way to tell that story. And I think our ambition was really big, and it was an interesting production because we wanted to be very loyal to the book. But what was fascinating about the adaptation that Brian De Palma made is that he navigated a minefield that all others have lost limbs to in their passing, and to try to adapt Carrie, because it is he simplified it to the extent that I think it plays even more interestingly now with all of the bullying culture that we're seeing, and also women on women violence, and girls can be mean, and that hasn't gone away. I'm curious, from a woman's perspective, seeing Carrie now, with where we are with body shaming and every other form of girl-on-girl bullying, which is also arguably motivated by the anticipation of what the guys are thinking and, how do we expose the weakest of the pack. It was actually a little disturbing to watch because it was like, this shit's real.
Yeah, I'd say that has been going. I mean, like, obviously the girl on girl kind of shaming has been going on forever. It's just now becoming
Since
more.
Girls.
Yeah, there's always been kind of that, and I mean, I'm sure it's the same for guys as well. But that whole kind of like locker room making fun of happens, and it's
now
just
there's a
part
trail.
of high school. But
Search history.
I think that's
Imagery.
where it's become more apparent now that, oh my God, girls are mean, just because you do have this kind of public environment where now it's not just catty comments and things being said under your breath in the hallways. It's now like Facebook posts and artificial accounts and sock puppet Twitter accounts, just so you can make fun of somebody.
Well, I think just 2 weeks ago we had a suicide young teen who was body shamed on Facebook and shamed until she committed suicide. And you just like it's almost like hearing science fiction when somebody tells me a story like that. I'm like, what?
We're living in a time of science fiction right now.
Yeah,
everything is so surreal.
Yeah,
but Carrie was always weird for me growing up, just because it also. On one end, you have these incredibly mean girls, but you also have this other problem that most people kind of overlook in Carrie, which is the mother telling her that she should be embarrassed of everything that her body is.
Right.
And it kind of gets lessened. It's not as apparent in the film, but that for me was what it was like all of society is telling me I need to cover up my dirty pillows, but what if I do want to show them a little bit?
Or just wash them.
Yeah, just wash them again. So, yeah.
but wait till the testicles both drop.
Yeah.
It's got to time well.
It is fascinating because horror is such a somebody will, I'm sure, object to this, but it is a feminist medium for storytelling. And I think that's one of the reasons I love it so much is the final girl. There's something great about the quality of roles that you see for a woman in a horror movie versus being in a straight drama. It's not as much to play.
There's a really good book out. It came out probably a decade ago called Recreational Terror. And there's a ton of horror novel or horror texts that are academic about the role of women on screen. Like, what's up with the final girl? Why do we like looking at nudity? Things like that. But this one is about how women watch horror films. And it was one of the first books out there that actually said, women love horror just as much as guys, but they watch it differently. And it's a really fascinating book. And actually, I owe this woman a lot because I'd read this book when I was an undergrad in college. And when I got to New York City, I realized that she taught at Hunter College. And I emailed her and was like, I love your book. I love your book. Can I come in and talk to you? And she ended up giving me a job teaching at Hunter College, which I kept going from there. But yeah, Isabel Pinedo. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in kind of gender differences in viewing styles, Recreational Terror is awesome.
Interesting.
It sounds great.
What I want to say about Carrie, and then we can move on or talk about De Palma if you like, is my new approach to sequels and remakes as of late. Because, as a horror fan, I tend to, when I get into a franchise again, I'm like, I'm going to watch them all from the beginning to the end. And now I feel like that diminishes new takes. So I like to spread them out and watch them as far apart as possible and judge them under the context of their own thing. So Scream Factory put out The Rage Carrie 2, which I actually am a big fan of. And
there's a lot to love about that.
I think it's a great capsule from the 90s. And Your Carrie is on it. And I don't think I had seen Your Carrie since it aired, or maybe it came out on VHS and I bought the VHS. But I was able to, and I had my memory of De Palma's, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. So I watched yours, and I was just kind of like fascinated by the approach, especially the time period, like Ryan said. I think the most brilliant thing about it is Angela Bettis.
She's amazing.
Yes,
and
so
Patricia
good.
Clarkson.
Yes. So when you think about like, well, who could possibly be that character, and you hear, oh, it's May. You're like, oh, all right, well, then I'll watch that.
Right.
But I guess what I want to know is, because you have since adapted other material in a similar way, what was the most valuable lesson you learned from Carrie 2002, remaking that property then, that maybe helped you approach something like Hannibal a lot easier?
I think I was probably too dedicated to the source material in adapting Carrie, and then trying to find little ways to modify it. And, you know, I think because of Angela Bettis's performance and Patricia Clarkson's performance, I would love to get into the editing room and cut that footage down into a less oppressive length. And I think there's a great story there because it's a great story. But there was a lot of meat that we left on the bone that we should have probably have picked off before we put it on the table. And it was also the approach to the meal was a little more faithful. And with Hannibal, I knew what the dish was that we were going to be serving, but I knew that we could prepare it in a way that gave it a sauciness that it didn't have. Because the real reason I wanted to adapt Hannibal, the thing that I was fascinated with in exploring it, was non-sexual love between two men, and what it is like to have male friendship that is not hinging on any sort of sexuality or vulnerability, physical vulnerability that way, but still has the properties. And as a game,
didn't you see the final episode?
yeah, but that's where it drew us. And it was kind of like, I honestly didn't intend for it to be homoerotic with my big gay agenda. I just thought like, I really want to tell the story about non-romantic love between two men, because it's complicated, because you get jealousies and you get there's all of the factors, but sexuality is removed. But it still has a lot of the needs and vulnerabilities.
It's not. It also feels like it's a mirror image relationship. So it's almost like they need to coexist. They are two sides of a coin,
right,
that's being spun in the air. And I felt like a Manhunter. I remember thinking the scene where they're in the jail and the way he shoots it looks like they're perfectly framed. You go from side to side, and it felt like that is an echo of that mirror relationship that you need to exist with that other part of you, and that together you would be a whole. Like these two people feel like halves of something, which isn't necessarily a sexual relationship, but it's symbiotic or something. You know?
Well, and it's also when we really respond to, when we make a friend, what we like chiefly in our brains, what makes our brains tingle is how that person sees us. So it is very self-centered. It's the same way when you meet somebody and you're like, oh, you like the same things that I do. Yeah. And we have a connection that way. So it's a very selfish validation in a way. And for Hannibal Lecter, he never anticipated meeting anybody that would ever understand him. So when he met somebody who had the capacity to understand him, he was like, oh, I thought I was just going to live the rest of my life without a friend because I was incapable of having a friend. And now I just might be able to have a friend. I wonder what that'll be like. And I think Hannibal was trying to be the best friend that he thought Will Graham needed. And I do think that he loved Will Graham's capacity to understand him selfishly, and that was the thing that drew them together. And you know, interestingly, in another way, Will looking at Hannibal Lecter, knowing that there is a great darkness there that is somewhere in the well of his soul if he just got deep enough. So that's why we like people, is because they make us feel normal in our strangeness, and that felt like it was a poem to friendship in a way that also got really subversive, and
it's like, well,
eventually homoerotic.
In season 3, where he goes to and he's living in Italy with Gillian Anderson's character, it's almost like if he had been there with Will Graham, maybe it would have been fine. Like if they'd moved together, maybe they could have lived the rest of their life on the run, but in a way that could have worked for them as a couple. You know, two people in a home together, it could have worked out. Versus with her, at some point, it was going to break because they don't complete each other in that way, you know?
Yeah, it was
kind of cool.
It was all stuff that the show told us it wanted to be. Like it's interesting going in every project that I've gone into. I'm like, this is what the show is, and then the show's like, stop putting me in those clothes, and I want to wear this, and so it's a fascinating phase. And I think for me personally, season 3, which was, I guess, of all the seasons, probably the most divisive because it was the most pretentious. That's everything I wanted the show to be. I feel so creatively satisfied with that season. I got to collaborate with Susie Sue on an original song, and Mark Allman did a song for the album, and we got to be pretentious as fuck. And it was so over the top sometimes that I just couldn't believe that we were getting away with it, because I was like, this is ridiculous. There's a baby and a pig.
We were kind of questioning it, too, because every single week on Killer POV, I remember, and I was at Fangoria at the time, and both of them, every single episode after it would air, there would be discussions about, I can't believe that they did that. I can't believe they're getting, I can't believe it's so arty and no one's like telling them not to do it. And,
I think in retrospect, it's going to stand out for what it did, for the doors it opened. I just have to say, closing on Hannibal, I mean, I assume if you're listening to this, you've seen the series. The last episode, the last final moments, I say this comfortably as a heterosexual man, I'd never wanted two characters to just make out already. Look at the end, I was like, oh, for the love of God, just do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
But, and that speaks to the strength of that relationship.
Well, I was going to go back to something you said that was fun. At what point in the series did the show tell you, stop dressing me in these clothes? Like, because I think everybody can feel, if you're engaged in a series, you can feel a shift. And for you, where was that shift?
I would say it was halfway through the first season. We had done a couple of it's the mushroom murders and it's the crazy kid killers. And it was strategic in a way because I'm working with a network who wants to make this a big procedural show. And I'm wanting to tell a serialized, character-driven story, trying to figure out, okay, we'll give you a little bit of Murder of the Week, and then we get to do this other stuff over here. And when we did the episode where Abigail went home and her friend was murdered, then I was like, this is a soap opera. This is what the show wants to be. These are the characters. And then we did a couple of things where we just slowly started to feather out the murders of the week and amplify the soap opera story. And that's when I think the show was most successful creatively for me, was when we were living in the soap opera. And I love that we had a power lesbian couple that were plotting to get sperm from.
Yeah, that was outrageous. So good. And Michael Pitt's performance is so fun to watch. I thought that was it's hard to beat Gary Oldman's Cordell, but it was still great.
Yeah, that Gary Oldman's performance was
hilarious. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Would you keep quoting?
Seemed like a good idea at the time. One of my favorite lines in movies. I cut off my face and fed it to a pig.
He was brilliant.
But the cool thing about the later seasons, I think towards the end of 2 and 3, is the expectations of the movies, of everything we've already seen, starts to get toyed with.
Right.
But then you always take it in a different. I thought the Tooth Fairy stuff was our friend Neil Marshall directed that one.
Yeah, he did such a wonderful job.
But when you actually saw the dragon in moments, I remember thinking the horror elements of some of that part was top notch. It was like seeing the things we didn't get to see in the movies, giving us a different perspective on familiar things.
Well, that was one of the things that I love so much about Red Dragon, the novel, is that Francis Dolarhyde is a heartbreaking character. He is so, I find, sympathetic that I'm able to compartmentalize the man who is struggling so sadly with his identity and his mental illness with the man who's murdering families. I was like, those are two different people.
Well, and probably to him too, right?
Yeah.
Two different people, parts of himself.
And that was the thing that was very important when we were telling that story, is that we've got to see a really broken human being struggling with mental illness and what he sees and what he's afraid of. And everything about Hannibal was trying to get the audience into the point of view of someone that they wouldn't necessarily empathize with.
I don't know, and I'm going to speak for ignorance because these guys follow the news side of it more than I do. But did you know at the time that the last episode of season 3, when you were writing it, was the finale at that stage? I don't know how.
No.
Okay, so the story was continuing past that moment.
So there's more.
Yeah. There weren't going to be any bodies found floating in that lagoon, and the whole point of showing Gillian Anderson sitting at a table with 2 additional empty place settings and her leg on the table was that there was a big splash and
dinner guests are coming.
Yeah.
But at the time of writing it, you didn't have that information, so you were just writing the cleanest end to that season you could.
Yeah, and it was like, what do I, how do we wrap this up?
Yeah.
And I love Gillian Anderson, and she's so like both the endings to season 2 and season 3 were like punctuated by her going like. These guys are crazy.
So, but I'm kind of into it.
Yeah, and that was the kind of the fascinating thing
to
do with her character. And it was cool to sort of say like, okay, if you knew everything, wouldn't you still want to see how hot the fire was and keep testing it? And I found her incredibly relatable and also compelling. And I was like, as long as he doesn't kill her and eat her and she's navigating that, I wanted her to be smarter than him.
Yeah, that might have been a line for me. Like if she had been eaten and killed, I think I would have really had a problem with that. I felt like it was such a good relationship. Yeah. I feel like everyone, even the worst, even the devil, needs a relationship that maintains, that he doesn't betray.
Yeah.
And that was his relationship. That just like Tony Soprano had with, his shrink. And
right.
There's similar echoes there. What are they doing now? What are the characters doing right now? What's the fall? Spoilers, give it all.
I hope we get to tell the story. We're the last airing was in August of 2015, and I think in August 2017 the rights revert back, and Martha De Laurentiis and I have talked about how do we bring it back. I think ideally for the cast it would be as miniseries here and there. Let's do like 6 to 8 episodes of this and do 6 to 8 episodes over here and do it as an irregular thing.
Which isn't irregular anymore.
Yeah.
No.
I think you're actually coming to a kind of a normal, her Gillian Anderson's other series we were talking
The
about.
Fall.
The Fall.
We just did a few episodes and that works.
Yeah.
It's satisfying.
The X-Files.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
the X-Files did it.
That was like 3, right? Or
6.
They did 6.
Oh, 6. Okay.
Yeah. But even like The Exorcist, has only been 10
miniseries.
Yeah.
Is it going on? Is it?
We don't know
I don't
yet.
know.
TBD. We hope.
It's still up in there. Yeah.
Everybody says it's fantastic, and I'm going to
Yeah.
binge watch it. And I love the reveal. Like when I had heard that spoiler.
heard it.
Well, of course, I'm
hard to avoid it now, I guess. Yeah.
And
We
I
were
was
all
just like,
texting each other that night, like,
Yeah.
holy shit, wait for it.
Yeah,
And
wait
then
for
But
it.
even without that, the first few episodes feel so original.
Yeah, it
That's
didn't
what makes
need
it work.
Right.
Like,
It's an original show.
Yeah, I would have kept watching even without that twist. But Candle Cove also did the only a couple episodes things. Like how
6.
many was 6?
6, yeah.
6 and 6, I just want to touch, before we wrap up here, I want to touch on your likes. How much do you keep up on modern horror, television shows, movies? Are there things in the genre, filmmakers that still excite you?
I don't keep up as much as I would like to because there's so much horror coming out now. I think I loved It Follows. I thought that was a really fun return to form, and it feels like, we are in these 80s cycles where Stranger Things and It Follows are all recalling a certain type of filmmaking. I would probably be hard pressed. Like if you named off horror movies that came out this year, chances are I haven't seen them. 2016 has been not a year that I've seen a lot of movies.
Sounds like a game. All right, The Invitation.
I saw The Invitation.
Then you're already a champion at this game. You just passed.
I thought it was really, really interesting, and I thought about it a lot after I saw it. And
But the dinner scene wasn't as good as yours, right? That's the only downside. You can't.
They didn't really highlight the food aside from the wine.
I can't go to a dinner party now without thinking of that movie. Like it has changed my...
Especially in
I
Silver
thought you
Lake.
were saying I can't go to a dinner party without judging the food that's put out on this table.
No, it's all
I don't know
about-
if you haven't seen one that I think you might think is fun was The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which
I saw the trailer for
Okay.
that.
Yeah,
That looks
it's
fascinating.
really good.
it's a fun one. It's just fun. Like it's just you don't have to overthink, but it's
Well,
a lot of
Bryan,
fun.
you can listen to our top 10 of 2016.
That's right.
next
I
week.
will.
Take some notes.
and
But,
you'll probably be co-hosting by then. So
I would love to come back.
What about comfort films for you? Because I know Carrie is one of your
I love
favorite films
Carrie.
of all time. So what are some of the horror movies you constantly go back to? Classics
The Shining is probably my favorite horror movie because I think it's about a writer who loses his mind, and it's also a son with a complicated relationship with a father that is abusive, and there's a relatability to Shelley Duvall's performance that I find so accessible.
Rob has a thing
I
for
love Shelley
Shelley.
Duvall in that movie.
Well, she's a fantastic actress, and in that movie, I remember it was so divisive because everybody, and I'd seen the book or seen the movie before I had read the book, and I had imprinted on the movie, and so the book was so different. I definitely imprinted on the movie first. The Shining is comfort food. Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th Part 2, even 3 and 4, and then on to 6.
Jason X.
I love Jason X.
see,
I think
alright.
Jason
Yeah.
X is
I can read you like a
ball.
You get like the ninja cyborg.
It knows
Rebo
exactly.
In other words,
what
all
movie
Jason
it is.
movies. You just said all Jason movies,
Pretty much.
Yeah.
except New York. You just
New York's hard
New York's
to watch.
kind of boring. Yeah.
Jason Goes to Hell.
Rosemary's Baby is a favorite. I watch Black Christmas every Christmas. I watch Halloween every Halloween. If there's a Friday the 13th that comes up, like we're watching one of them, there's a lot of horror comfort food.
Well,
Is there a horror movie that you think at some point I'm going to make that horror film, or do you think you're like content by doing these like longer narratives? I mean, they were much bigger.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's. I would love to tell a horror story in
that 2-hour form.
Yeah, and I think it's conducive for it, and I think horror you have to tell a specific type of horror for long form, and it's distinctive from short form horror storytelling because some things you can sustain and some things you can't sustain.
Yeah. Totally.
you've gotten to play with Carrie and Hannibal and the Munsters and now American Gods. If there was no just wish list, is there any horror character? Would it be like a Halloween or Friday the 13th, Jason,
Anything.
Freddy?
Yeah.
Who would you love to play around and play with?
I would love to remake Halloween 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's a brilliant story. You have a warlock wanting to kill all children on Halloween
Yes.
night.
Yes.
Tell you what,
Yes.
Brian. How about just a series? Why don't we just
I would do Halloween.
Season of the Witch.
Yeah.
Season.
Series.
One
A
season of the
season
Witch.
of
Or a
the
mini
Witch.
season
yeah.
of the Witch.
Yeah.
Mini-series of The Witch. I like it.
Wow.
Nice.
That's pretty amazing. Brian, thank
We
you
can't
so
top that.
Thank
yeah,
you.
I mean, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
thanks.
Yeah.
Great pleasure. Hopefully we'll have you back to talk even more horror
I
stuff.
would love it.
Yeah, we
And,
can't wait
when-
for American Gods. Good luck on it. I hope it's a smash.
Thank you.
When is it
Star
airing
Trek.
again?
It is going to be, they haven't announced the date, but it's sometime next year.
Okay, so
Fantastic.
be on the lookout for it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.